Hello, we're going to look at do until loops in this video, which is really important you watch and understand, especially if you've learnt to program in Python, where these do not exist as a concept. They exist in some languages, but not in Python. So it's especially important that you understand how they work because they can show you code which uses do until. You can, of course, write in Python, but they can show you code using do until. So like a while loop, which does exist in Python, of course, this is another example of condition controlled iteration. We've got one type of count controlled iteration, for loop. We've got two types of condition controlled iteration, while and do until. So if it's doing the same purpose, how is a do until loop different to a while loop? Well, in terms of the condition, it's framed in the opposite way. So a do until loop runs if the condition is false, whereas a while loop runs if the condition is true. So if you're ever converting between the two, you've got to flip your condition to be the opposite. And another big difference is that the condition is at the end of the block. So this means the code always runs at least once because the condition gets checked after it's run the code at least once. Whereas a while loop, the condition is at the front, so therefore it may not run at all. So we can look at this here. This example I've reused for 3 videos since the for loop. So it's not really a kind of a condition controlled problem because it's just counting up. We would use a for loop normally for this, but this is a while loop. We can see our condition is at the beginning of the block. So we check our condition first. This means a while loop doesn't always run. Occasionally it won't run because the condition is initially false. The code inside it does run if the condition is true. Whereas here is the same code written as a do until loop. We can see at least a little bit kind of lopsided because we start with the word do. We indent the code which goes in the body of the loop. These are the lines which run when the loop repeats. But our condition comes at the end of this structure. So we've got until count is greater than 5. And we can see immediately this condition is the opposite of the condition the while loop used. So not only are we shifting where the condition goes, we are flipping it around so that now it's telling us at what point do we end our loop. Whereas in a while loop, the condition tells us at what point do we start the loop. Let's do an example question together using do until. So in this question, we are saying we need to ask the user to enter their password. The correct password is PW123. When this is entered, say access granted. Otherwise, ask them to re-enter until it is correct. So we have to use condition controlled iteration here because of this last part here. We're going to get them to re-enter until it is correct. That word until in particular is important because we don't know how many times it's going to take the user to get this password correct. So therefore I can't use a for loop because I don't know how many times it's going to be. So I can use either a while loop or a do until loop. I'm going to use a do until loop here, but I might show you a while loop just to show you the difference because it can be quicker to do it as a do until loop. One of the reasons it can be quicker is because sometimes, especially if all we're doing in our loop body is asking for input, we can often save a line by just entering our loop straight away. So I'm going to write the word do to begin our loop. And I'm going to straight away ask the user to enter their password. So let's go password equals input. Okay, so what else needs to potentially repeat in this program? Well, actually nothing really, because when it's entered correctly, we're going to say access granted, but I won't say this inside my loop. I'll say this after my loop. So now I just need to go back on my indentation. So go back at the same level as do. Please try and be really, really careful where your indentation is lying. It should line up really nice and consistently. So I'm going to write the word until, and I'm going to write my condition. Well, what is my condition? I'm going to keep looping until the password is equal to PW123. So the way I talk to my students about this is I tend to say, well, a do until loop is framed in quite a positive way. We want it to be equal to PW123. Whereas a while loop is quite a negative way of framing it. In a while loop, we would say something like while password is not equal to PW123. Do until, quite optimistic, quite positive. While loop, a bit more pessimistic. It focuses on what we don't want to happen. So that's our loop. And all I've got to do now is wrap up my code by printing access granted, because we will not get to this point in our program unless the user has typed in a password equaling PW123. Here is the equivalent code as a while loop. And we can see it's a little bit longer because I've had to repeat this input line twice. We looked at in the last video how important it is to make sure if you are using user input in your condition, you always ask the user again in your while loop, otherwise you have an infinite loop. And so I've had the same line repeated here twice, whereas in my do until loop, I only have it once. And this is because this code always runs at least once. No matter what, this line is going to run at least once. That's why I don't have to repeat it. In this while loop example, the code inside the while loop may not run at all. So that's why I had to have something outside of my while loop to ensure that it did run at least once. So a do until loop can be a little bit more concise. So you might choose to use it to be a little bit shorter. One drawback is in some questions, if it's asking you to say, write a customized message if they got it wrong, like access denied, the problem here is in a while loop, I can just go print access denied above my input line. I can do that quite easily because this code will only run if a password was wrong initially. However, here I can't really print access denied up here or even below this input line because this code runs at least once. So if I did put access denied here, the first thing the user would see would be the message access denied, which is not a very nice start to their day. So that's one flaw with do until. It's only really useful if you are just generally just putting user input in your loop body. If you're putting anything else, like a customized message, we sort of need to still use a while loop, unfortunately. And the last thing I'll say is because do until doesn't exist in Python, if you want to practice it, it can be hard because you've got to find exam questions. However, you can also use this website. I'll link it below. It's really, really good. I've shown it in a few videos so far where it basically pretends like this is a real language and runs it. And so you can test your code, make sure you are understanding how do until is working.